So, good afternoon and welcome to Edinburgh, where we are today with the FlyJSim 737-200. Beautiful little add-on. Bought it, I think, already a couple of years ago for X-Plane 10 and flew with it a lot until the IXEG 737-300 came along. And from that moment on, I kind of forgot about the 737-200. And that was, of course, a big mistake from me, but because this is one heck of an add-on, I really love it. As you can see, the outside modeling is excellent. It's a really beautifully made add-on. Of course, the 737-200 always looks a bit odd with the weird narrow engines that it has, but well, of course, it's the oldest member of the 737 family, and it is a joy to fly it. And the sound set that comes with it is beautiful, and it's quite hard to believe that the FlyJSim is basically a one-man operation. And as you can see, the reflections in the fuselage are already pretty nice, despite the fact that this add-on is not yet fully compatible with X-Plane 11 yet. Um, well, without further ado, well, what we're going to do today, as you can see, the livery on the plane is the British Airways Manchester. So Manchester is also the destination for our flight today. I created a short VOR to VOR route, departing Edinburgh, runway 24 via the Tella 6 Charlie departure, then to Carlisle, Pole Hill, down to Manchester. And from Manchester, we'll fly to Liverpool as we're not going to fly that unless Manchester is closed, because Liverpool, that is our alternate for today. So that's about it, what we're going to do today. Well, let's just get into the flight deck and show you what that looks like. Now, if you are familiar with the 737 300, 400, that was so beautifully modeled by IXEG, or with the 737 NG, the overhead panel should look quite familiar, although there are some differences. Very small, but the most obvious one is that there is no IRS in this airplane. This airplane doesn't have an IRS, it doesn't have a flight management computer, so navigation, lateral navigation is done the old-fashioned way by flying VOR to VOR. There is an option of buying an INS. I don't have it, so I'm not able to show you that. If you buy this, it will be shown, I think it's over here, but I don't know how the INS works, so I haven't bought it yet. Might do it in the future, but we'll have to look into that and see how much time I have for that. As you can see, the flight deck looks very nice. Lots of switch and buttons and knobs and, well, you name it, but no computers. And that's exactly what makes this airplane a attention seeker, because you have to be on top of the airplane for the entire flight that you make. As you will see in this video, if I screw up things, it's probably because I'm too late at noticing stuff. It really shows you how spoiled you are when you are used to fly modern jetliners, where everything is, of course, done by computers. And the main difference is that in a modern jetliner you do a lot in the pre-flight. Of course, you program your flight management computer. Not with this one. You don't have to align anything, so it's just basically engine start, set some frequencies and go on your way. You have to alter the frequencies, headings and courses throughout the flight. There's no auto throttle system in this, so you have to set your throttles manually. That also gives you quite a workload, so you constantly have to monitor your speed, rate of descent, rate of climb, altitude, you name it. It all comes with it. But it's really a lot of fun to fly it, and it's really rewarding, satisfactory to create to complete a flight with this add-on. So let's just get going, start her up. There's the battery. Let's set the parking brake. You have to set the parking brake in order to be able to connect ground power. If you don't have the parking brake on, you cannot connect it. And of course, ground power is vital for starting up the airplane. So we don't have to start the APU straight away, which in its turn saves fuel. So let's look at the aft overhead panel. Let's test a few things. So there we are. The airplane comes with a set of preset views. You select them on the numpad of your keyboard. So numpad 9 is this view, numpad 8, numpad 7, numpad 6, numpad 5, numpad 4, 3, 2, 1 and 0 for a nice overview. I usually fly from viewpoint 4 and sometimes for the overhead I switch to 8 or 9. Let's do the lights test. Of course, strip by strip. That's all in working order. We already checked the aft overheads. Let's check the rows on the captain's side, the instrument panels and first officer panels. All the radios, they work. The fire warning systems, they also have lights working, so that's checked. We can check the fuel quantity. 5,000 pounds in each tank, left and right, so that's 10,000 pounds, which should be plenty to complete this flight. Yaw damper is tested. Engine oil quantity is also tested, so that is fine. Ground proximity warning.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear. Terrain, enough. Airspeed, low. Sink rate, full up. Terrain, full up. Don't sink. Don't sink. Too low, terrain. Too low, gear. Too low, flaps. Too low, terrain. Light slope. Banking, banking. 100, 50, 30, 20, 10, 5.
And that's the ground proximity test completed. So now let's check some fire warnings. They are fine as well. So with that being done, we can now set the QNH, which is 2912. I set the weather myself today. And it came up with 2912 as an altimeter setting. Which of course I'm quite surprised because oh, it's 2992 anyway. Sorry, mistaken with a previous flight. This is the fourth attempt of making this video. And in my previous videos, the weather was set to, the altimeter was set to 2912, so that's. But I deleted the preference folder content in the Explain 11 folders because I had the public beta 13 installed. So I guess that went out of the window as well. So we now have 2992, which is basically perfect. We're not gonna mess with that. Let's set the radios for our departure. Like I said, Tela 6 Charlie departure, runway 24 in Edinburgh. So what we'll do, climb straight ahead via Uniform Whiskey NDB, which is 368, to India Tango Hotel 7 miles, then left turn, heading 166, intercept the radial 346 inbound, or radial 166 to Tela. And we'll have to cross Tela at 6,000 feet. So that's the altitude constraint and our initial climb altitude. So let's set VOR1 to 108.9 and standby frequency to 113.8. We'll do that down here. 108.9 and 113.8 as our standby, and we can set the ADF to 368. Oh. Crap. So there we are. That's now done, and the altitude of course to 6,000. When you set or switch knobs in this airplane, you have to look carefully to your mouse indicator, the cursor. You have this small curved angle which gives you steps by 100, and the larger curved angle or curved arrow gives you the altitude steps by 1,000. So we'll set it to 6,000 feet. There's no RTO on the auto brake system, so that's the difference with the more modern 737 versions. We cannot set it to RTO, so we don't have to bother about that. And of course the initial course is 243. That's the runway heading here of runway 24 in Edinburgh. Now, as you can see, again we have different mouse indicators. The left and right arrow, if you hold your left mouse button and you move around, it makes very swift adjustments to the numbers in the window. And if you have the curved arrow, it gives you steps of 1 degree. So heading, for instance, we have to fly heading 166 when we are 7 miles out of the Edinburgh runway. So if I do that one click at a time, it takes some time. If I just press this, then I can scroll and just adjust 2 of them. So that's very nice. Well, we already set that. Let's set the speed buck to 50 knots below 10,000 feet. That's all right. And basically that's it for the pre-flight. There's not much else we have to do except for starting the engines. And in order to do that, we have to run the overhead panel flow. So let's switch on the fuel pumps, galley power, and passenger signs. We can already switch on the window heats. This is all being done after start. Gas per fan off. Packs off. Isolation valve can remain auto for now, so these can remain off until we have started the APU. We have to set the pressurization system in the airplane. We will fly level 210. And that gives us a cabin altitude of 1,400. So we'll select 1,400 over here. There we go. And the landing altitude in Manchester is 257 feet. So let's dial in 250 as a landing altitude. This one can remain ground for now. Switch on the position lights and the anti-collision lights and start the APU. Now, in order to get the APU working, I had to make an adjustment in the plane maker application that comes with the X-Plane 11. If you want to know how to do it, let me know. I'll do a separate video on it. It's very short. It's not very difficult, but you just have to know how it works. And that APU fix also works with the IXEG 737 300 400, at least in the previous versions of X-Plane. We are now 4, so we can switch the APU to the buses. That's now done. We can disconnect the ground power. And well, normally you could use ground call for pushback, but in the public beta 13 of X-Plane 11 that doesn't work. So if I press manual and release the parking brake, nothing happens, as you can see. So we're not going to do that. I will start up the engines on site. And first I'll try to reverse out of the parking bay. If that doesn't work, we'll just taxi out of there. It's not completely realistic, of course, but we have to cope with it until the airplane is fully compatible and all this stuff works. In X-Plane 10 you could just do a normal push and start. So for now let's start up engine number 2. Oh, wait, so we first have to set the isolation valve open, the APU bleed open, and open this for the main engines. And when that's up to pressure, there we go. Let's start up engine number 2. And the engine startup sequence is quite similar to that of more modern 737 family members. Press the starter, switch it to ground start, watch the needle spool up to 20. When it reaches 20, 25, just flip it over and open the fuel flow. And there we are. Start a cutout, so now let's start engine number 1. Open the fuel flow. I really love the sound set that comes with this airplane. The sound of the engines is beautifully modeled. Or recorded, I don't know how you call it. So that's the engine start completed. So we can now run the overhead flow again, set the generators to the buses. With that being done, we can set the pitot static heats on and the electric hydraulic comes on. Gas prevent on, PEX go on, isolation to auto, APU bleed off, switch off the APU. The pressurization system can go to flight mode. We switch on the taxi runway turn off lights. Check the recall, there's no warning lights there, so that's fine. Set flaps 2. And we'll then perform a flight control check, so full left, full right, neutral, down, up, neutral, rudder, full left, full right, neutral. Now back to the flight deck. If you press on V card down here, you get either for takeoff or landing the appropriate V speeds, the EPR setting at different flap settings. I usually set flaps 2 for takeoff in this airplane. Gives us a trim setting of 5.2, so let's check that one. Well, that's almost correct, slightly up. That should do the trick. And it gives us a V1 and a rotate speed of 130 knots, V2 137, climb out speed is usually V2 plus 20, so we give that 157 for our initial climb, 157, 160, around that figure. And that's about it. We have a temperature of 15 degrees Celsius, so we don't expect to need anti-ice during takeoff, but we might need it during climb. So let's see if we can get out of here by thrust reversing, release the parking brake and switch the reversers on. You can also immediately see the nice animation of the reverse. But that doesn't do anything, so we'll just have to taxi our way out of this with an immediate turn to the right. So let's give it some throttle. There we go. Now the airport that you're looking at, by the way, is freeware. It's I downloaded it from the explain.org forums. Well, it's all right. It's not perfect. It's not Mr. X quality or something like that, but it's very, very nicely modeled airport. Much better than the stock scenery, which basically has nothing except a runway and taxiways in Edinburgh. So, well, if you have to compete with that, everything is better than nothing. Some of the textures are quite low res, as you already noticed, and there are some trees on the tarmac that shouldn't be there, but well, it doesn't cost you a dime, and it's always better than having nothing in there. And of course, it gives a nice impression of being at the Edinburgh airport. The control tower looks somewhat like that in real life. I've been there 2 or 3 times. And again, listen at that nice sound sets. So let's reduce some speed. We are going quite fast. Switch on the landing lights. Switch off runway, turn off taxi lights. Strobe lights can come on. We'll line up on the runway and do some before takeoff checks, and then we'll be on our way. As you can see, the entire flight preparation only took us about 9 minutes, not much more than that. And that includes taxiing to the runway, so that's pretty nice. If you consider that in the IXCG, the 737-3400 or the NGX, only the alignment of the flight management system in itself costs 8 minutes. Then you have to program it, and well, you name it. You normally spend about 20-25 minutes with preparations. Not with this one, it's just basically start up and go. Set some frequencies and you're on your way. So let's check. Lights are on. Taxi lights, runway turn-off lights are off. The engine starters can go to the second setting. So one click to the right, low ignition. That's the same as the continuous ignition in the modern 737s. Pressurization is set. Specs are on. Strobe lights are on. Course is set. Heading is set. Speed buck is set to 50 knots. QNH was okay. Flaps are 2 green lights. Auto brakes cannot be set, so that's not an issue. Altitude constraint 6,000 feet is dialed in, and the frequencies 108.9 or 113.8 are programmed or set. So there's nothing that stops us. The brakes are released, and let's say we are cleared for takeoff. Cabin crew, take your seats for takeoff. Let's give them 30 seconds to get in their seats. And let's throttle up. Airspeed active, 60 knots. 80 knots check. 100s. 120. V1 rotates. Positive rates. Gear up. Oh, let's lower the nose slightly. Turn to the right. Heading 243, and we are now at the speed that we want, 157 knots. So let's. You really have to adjust your forward speed by either pulling harder or releasing on the yoke. Your rate of climb is defining for your climb out speed. We are now already at 2,300 feet, so I'll lower the nose and make speed for 250 knots. We are 2 miles out, and when we are 7 miles out we have to make that left turn heading 166. We are slightly off course. We need correction to the left, because you want this to be one straight arrow. So if that center bit moves to the left, you fly to the left, and when it moves to the right, you fly to the right. And as you can see, I was a bit too late with that now. Flaps 1. Flaps up, and we are on course 5 miles out. Let's lower the nose, we need to gain speed, and we are now approaching 6,000 feet, so we also got back on the throttles. Seven miles out, left turn heading 166. And level up off at 6,000 feet now. We have to descend slightly. That doesn't really matter because we have to gain some speed as well. So heading 166 is now selected, or we are now flying heading 166, I should say. Reduce thrust, descend a bit, and I'll set the autopilot engage, heading select, and altitude hold. Gear lever can come off now. The outboard landing lights will be retracted. I switched the frequency to 113.8 and the course to 166 as well. And we'll fly VOR lock. I don't understand why it isn't There we go. Correcting the altitude to 6,000 feet now. Now I have to increase the thrust again, because we are leveling off, and otherwise the speed will drop too much. And we want to increase the speed for 250 knots. There we go. The next beacon or VOR on our flight plan is Carlisle at 110.70, so I'll dial that in the standby window. 110.7. And we are now passing 250 knots, so let's go back on the throttles and correct that speed. As you can see, you're constantly busy with checking distance to fly, airspeed, altitude, you name it. It really gives you a lot to do, which is, at least I think, is a lot of fun. It also takes you quite a lot of practice to really master this way of, well, practice. It takes a bit of getting used to flying this way. It's a different routine, of course, because every time you reach a waypoint you have to first set heading select, then flip over the VOR to the next frequency, then you have to alter the course, so it really gives you something to do. And 250 knots, there it is. So increase the thrust slightly to keep the speed from dropping any further. We are now 6 miles out. Carlisle is still some distance away. And we'll have to fly to Carlisle at course 154. So for now I'll switch it over to heading select. And already changed the course to 154. And we are now 138 miles away from Manchester, 113.55 on nav2, that's the Manchester VOR. So we now know how far away from Manchester we still are. When we are 1 mile out, I'll set the heading to 154 as well. Slightly increase the speed. There we go, 154. I'll set altitude 210, flight level 210 that is, and switch the autopilot to indicated airspeed hold, advance the thrust. Now the airplane wants to make speed, but since I set indicated airspeed hold, that's 250 knots, the airplane will start to climb in order to counter the increase of the airspeed. So you will now have a very steep climb at first, because it has to wind off 17 knots to get back to 250, and once it's at 250 you will see the rate of climb decrease until the airplane is climbing at 250 knots. I also have to set on the switch the radio to 110.7. As you can see, there is no distance indicating in here, so that means we are still out of range of the VOR. once we are in range, you will see the distance from the VOR in here, and then we can switch the autopilot back to VOR lock. As you can see, 247, nice climb, 3000 feet per minute, passing 10,000 feet, so lights off and set the fasten seatbelt signs to auto. And we can now also increase the forward speed for, let's say, 300 knots. So now you will see that the rate of climb starts to decrease, the airplane starts to gain forward speed, and once it is at 300 knots, the plane starts climbing again, and then it will climb at 300 knots until it reaches flight level 210. And there we go, approaching 300 knots, rate of climb increasing. It will now increase a bit faster. Now the next beacon on our flight plan is Pole Hill at 112.10. So we'll dial that one. Oh, we are now in range of the VOR, so we'll set this back to VOR lock. So that's now set. And what did we say Pole Hill was? 112.10. So we'll dial that in the standby. We'll dial that in as the standby frequency now. Yeah, 112.1. And Pole Hill, we need to fly there on course 163. So once we are approximately 10 miles out of Carlisle, switch back the heading select to on. And then I'll set the radio frequency for Pole Hill at course 163, and we will intercept that. For now we are good for a minute, so that gives us the opportunity to take a look from outside the airplane. The scenery that you're looking at are zonephoto.xplane.fr zoom level 16, that's 16 photo scenery tiles. You can download them from zonephoto.x-plane.fr. And as you can see, zoom level 16, that's plenty. It looks great to just overfly it, and zoom level 16 tiles are a bit smaller than zoom level 17 or zoom level 18. So I can really recommend, if you have certain parts of the world where you fly over regularly but you never land there, just download zoom level 16 tiles. Might even do a bit less, save you some hard disk space, and still looks pretty nice. At least I think it looks very nice. Clouds and weather are still SkyMaxPro V4, just as in the previous videos. We're now approaching 20,000 feet. Which means we have to start cutting back on our throttles or increase our speed buck, which will do the latter. So I will increase cruise speed to 330 knots. So now the plane levels off at flight level 210. Speed will increase, and when it reaches 330 knots, we have to cut back on the throttles. We are also now 7 miles away from the DME. So I'll set the autopilot back to heading select. We switch over the navigation frequency. And we'll set the course for 163. And VOR log. I had to switch this back to manual before doing the heading select. I forgot that. That's when you get that the airplane continues to follow the VOR log. So that was a mistake from my side. And we are also over our speed limit. So let's cut back on the throttles because the plane started to climb. Doesn't need to do that. The only reason it did is that I set the thrust levers were too high, so it will now level off flight level 210, and I will increase the throttles to keep the speed at 330 knots. As you can see, it's not flawless. It really takes you some practice and getting used to. But that's also a lot of fun. Increase the throttles a bit more. We have to gain some speed again. We are now 90 miles away from Manchester. We are flying at flight level 210. There's a rule of thumb in aviation to determine your top of descent in miles from your destination. That you take your your cruise altitude, divide that by 1000, so 21,000 divided by 1000 is 21. Multiply the outcome by 3, so 21 times 3 is 63. That means that you have to start your descent 63 miles away from the airport. Unless you fly straight in, then you add another 10 miles to the outcome of the multiply. So 21 times 3 is 63. If you were to fly straight in, at 10 to 73 miles out. We're not going to do that. We'll fly to the Manchester VOR, then make a left turn, fly a downwind basically. We'll make a circuit and land from there. So we'll take 21 times 3 is 63 miles out as our top of descent. I will reduce speed to our descent speed of 280 knots at 80 miles out, and then we'll slowly reduce the speed for 280 knots. So 80 miles out, let's set the speed bug at 280, about there. Cut back on the throttles and watch the speed decrease slowly to 280 knots, and at 63 miles out we'll set the altitude to, let's say, 10,000 feet at first, or 9,000 feet. And then we'll start our descent from there. So let's cut back on the throttles a bit more. We need to lose speed a little bit faster. We have 6.5 miles now to lose 20 knots. And the airplane is quite slippery. You really need to... Well, it's quite hard to reduce speed in a descent. It doesn't really do that, so it's pretty vital that you Have your speed correct before you start your descent, because slowing down from 330 knots to 280 knots while the plane is descending is almost impossible. So let's increase the thrust a little bit. We are now 280 knots, 65 miles. So what I'll do now is I'll set the autopilot to indicated airspeed hold, reduce the altitude setting for 9,000 feet, cut back on the throttles, and now you see the plane starts to descend to keep the speed at 280 knots until it reaches 9,000 feet, and then the plane will level off and we have to, of course, get back on the speed. Now the next VOR, of course, in the flight plan is Manchester VOR. So that's the 113.55. So now I also have to dial that in the standby frequency, 113.55. And once we are at Pole Hill, we have to select that one. We'll fly to Manchester on heading, well, it says 196. So we'll just stick to that. And now we are descending 1500 feet per minute, 280 knots. Still 35 miles to go upon reaching Pole Hill. So that all looks very well. So as part of our approach preparation, let's set the radio altimeter to 250 feet as our minimums. Pressurization still looks good. Oh crap, could have switched the engine starters to off way back. It's one of those mistakes. It's one of those things that you kind of forget about because you're so busy with setting the radios, checking the distance to go, checking your speed, your rate of climb or rate of descent. That's one of the things that you have to practice in order to master it. Because the plane will keep you busy with other stuff. So it's quite vital to run the checklists in this little birdie. We can also already check the approach plate for Manchester. What we'll do is we'll fly to the Manchester VOR, that's down there. We'll make a left turn to fly back along the localizer, then we'll make the left turn heading 008, make this turn at 3,500 feet for final approach into runway 23 right. That will be our approach. We'll use the ILS at 109.5. I think the first part of the final approach will be done auto flight, and once we are established and we are nice and stable, we will take over control of the airplane and fly it in ourselves. Can already set the auto brakes to medium and arm the speed brakes, so we cannot forget to do that later on, because the final stages of the flights will get you very busy. We'll land with flaps 30 at the VREF of 127. And once we reach 10,000 feet, we have to switch on the landing lights and reduce the speed for 250 knots. We don't have to mind the altimeters because I set the weather myself. The altimeters in Manchester will also be 29902. And we are now heading straight for the clouds. The total air temperature is, well, almost 10 degrees now, so I'm not going to bother switching on the anti-ice. What I am going to bother about is starting to reduce speed for 250 knots soon, because we are approaching 10,000 feet. And of course the plane needs some time to respond to our command, so let's start reducing for 250 knots now. Or make it 240 immediately. Now you see the plane starts leveling off, almost 10,000 feet, until it reaches 240 knots. And then it will continue its descent. So we'll also switch on the landing lights already. And with 5 miles to go, we will... oh, now the airport is being loaded in, and you'll see a drop in performance for a while. We are 5 miles out. I'll set the autopilot to heading select. We'll have to change the course to, let's say, 196. Or anyway, we fly direct to Manchester. I think it's about 210. Flip over the frequency to 113.55. 196. VOR lock, and now the airplane will start intercepting that radial. So we can now also set the heading to 196. We are still 24 miles out. We're now at 240 knots, approaching 9,000 feet. When we are at 9,000 feet, I will reduce speed further for 220 knots. And then we'll start descending for, let's say, 5,000 feet for now. So 220 knots. Airplane levels off. I'll set the altitude now for 5,000 feet. And we'll go back to the IAS mode, indicated airspeed. So now the plane will descend to 5,000 feet while maintaining a forward speed of 220 knots. 20 miles out of the Manchester airport. Now the ILS frequency is 109.5, so we'll have to dial that into the standby window. 109.5. So the approach course for the ILS is 233, so minus 180 degrees. That means we have to, upon reaching Manchester, make a left turn heading 053. think I'll start that turn for 053 when we are approximately 5 miles away from the Manchester beacon. So as you can see throughout the video, it really gives an attention keeper. You really have to stay on top of the airplane, think ahead, plan ahead, constantly be aware of your flight plan. It's not like you switch on the autopilot, go watch your favorite movie or series and come back when you reach the airport. No, you really have to stay on top of it. And that's a lot of fun. I can only say that. It's really, really rewarding. If you do that correctly and if you practice it a couple of times, you can really well, you actually have the feeling that you've done something to get the airplane there instead of just typing in some waypoints in a computer. And as you can also see, the animation of the gauges is really smooth. It's really nice. And it still is one of my favorite add-ons for X-Plane. FlyJSim 737-200. And the next one on my list will be the FlyJSim 727, which is said to be the best add-on for X-Plane. I haven't flown it myself ever, so we're gonna see that. But it's definitely on my wish list. So 1,000 feet to go, 9 miles out. Once we are leveling off at 5,000 feet, I will also reduce the speed for 185 knots. So let's reduce the speed now to 185. We are 5 miles out, so I set the heading to 053 now. And switch the airplane to heading select, so it will now make that turn. I will set the course for 233. Yep. We'll set flaps 1. And we'll descend to 3,500 feet. And we switch over the frequency to the ILS now. So we now have the ILS distance in here. We have to increase the throttles, set flaps 2 or set flaps 5 immediately. And I'll set the airplane back to IAS so it can descend to 3,500. And we'll fly to make a left turn heading 008 at 12 miles out on the ILS. So once this one is 12, we make a left turn heading 008. We fly on that heading for about 1 minute. I will time that on my yoke. In the SkyTech Pro Flight yoke, there is a built-in stopwatch, so I can use that to time the 1 minute lag. Might even do it. Well, we are exactly on the ILS now, on the localizer. So 1 minute should be enough, 1 minute on heading 008, and then we'll make a right-hand turn to intercept the localizer and establish ourselves on the ILS. So we're now 3,500 feet, so increase the thrust to keep our speed at 185. Niner miles out. 10 miles out. $11 miles out. $12 miles, so left turn heading 008. And I will start the timer now. Airspeed 180 is perfect. 24 seconds in our leg. $40 in our leg. And we'll start our right hand turn in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So let's fly heading 180 first. So increase the thrusts. Keep that speed at 180 knots. And we then continue the turn heading 203, so we have a 30-degree angle on the localizer, which is, well, I think a nice angle to intercept. Slightly back on the throttles to keep that speed stable. Now we are on our intercept heading. We see that the localizer is already alive, so we immediately switch this to the auto approach mode. And that will cause the airplane to establish itself on the localizer. Which it is doing right now. So I can set the heading now to 233. For missed approach heading, and I'll reduce the speed to 160 knots. Because we are still out of the glide slope, it's now a good time to wind up some speed. VREF flaps 30 is 127 knots. Now with flaps 5 sets. So we'll set flaps 10 and increase the throttles. We have to overcome some drag now from the flaps as well. Glide slope is alive. We'll take in a 5 knot wind component, making the approach speed 131. So I'll set the buck to 131. And we'll reduce speed further. And now the glide slope is captured. 10 miles out. Going way back on the thrust. Now to idle to wind off speed. I'll set the missed approach altitude for 4,000 feet. And we can select gear down. Flaps 15. Flaps 20, and now you can see that we really have a lot of drag to overcome because the speed is dropping quite rapidly, so increase the thrust. Flaps 30. And 131, 132 is perfect approach speed for this approach today. So we are on the glide slope, on the localizer, 7 miles out. Let's run a landing checklist. Gear is down locked 3 green. Flaps 30 green. Auto brakes medium. Spoilers armed. Missed approach heading 233 is set. Missed approach altitude 4,000 feet is also set. Lights are on. We can set the engine starters to low ignition. Recall is checked, no lights. We have the runway in sight. It's down there. So, go back on the throttles a bit. Let's try if we can land her ourselves. Autopilot disengaged. Now the airplane in itself flies really nice in manual control, so any deviations from glide slope or centerline are only to blame on my flying skills, which aren't too good anymore, but we'll see what we can do. Increase the thrust a bit. We are slightly low now, so go. Slightly to the left. We are flying to the right, but we need to correct to the left. Slightly high now. So let's cut back on the throttles a little bit, because we are speeding as well. Nothing too bad, but still. Landing cleared. Glide slope.
Take brake. Take brake. Take brake.
Aim for the numbers and now switch our view to the end of the runway. Closing in the throttles. There's no need to scream, that was a perfectly nice landing. Reverse is engaged, 100 knots. 80 knots. Reverse is idle. 60 knots manual braking. Let's cut out the auto brakes. And just taxi to the next exit, which we'll make right now. Let's bring the airplane to a complete stop and see what that landing looked like from the outside. Here we are. So let's go back to the replay mode. A bit wobbly. The nose movement was a bit too much on this approach. That's a pretty nice landing, I think. Nice and smooth. Again, the beautiful animation on the thrust reverses with sound effects. And the rollouts for the next runway exits. Well, it's not too exciting. So let's go back to the normal mode and let's I think the speed brakes didn't work correctly, but well, let's retract the flaps. 25, 15, 10, 5, 2, 1, up. So, speed brakes up. We'll taxi to the gate now. Landing lights can come off. Engine starters go to off. Strobe can come off. The pressurization can be set back to the ground modes. Pitot static heats can come off. And we'll just taxi to the gate now. I think the altimeter should be at 2993. Welcome to Manchester, which is, by the way, the payware Manchester airports. EGCC by no, Icarus. You can buy it in the .org store. To be recommended. Looks really nice. So let's just take the first gate down there, number 10. Let's see if we are on the line. Yeah, about right. Taxi slightly up. And there we are, so parking brake on. Let's connect the ground power. And set the ground power to the buses. And now we can switch off the fuel flow to the engines. Runway turn off, taxi lights are off. Backs are off. Cabin crew, doors to manual. And we can also switch off the fuel pumps and the yaw damper, of course. Can release the passengers from their seat belts. Anti-collision lights go off. Position lights go off. Cabin crew, doors may be opened. And that is the flight for today. Edinburgh to Manchester with the FlyJSim 737-200. Really nice add-on, beautifully modeled, fun to fly. I can only recommend it wholeheartedly. It's a very fun airplane. You won't be sorry for your purchase. It's still not fully compatible with X-Plane 11, but the developer has already announced that he will make it compatible with X-Plane 11. So you might just want to wait until he releases the full compatible version. But soon as he does, buy it. It's really a very, very nice plane. Lots of fun. Of course, I'm not an expert. I'm not a professional pilot. So if you saw any mistakes in the video, please let me know. Leave a comment. Any tips, tricks, suggestions, or questions? Just keep it respectful in the comments, please. And I'll see you again for another flight. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.